Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another session of International Education Week UNE 2024. We are so glad that you're joining us for this exciting event, which is being live streamed via StreamYard, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Tell us where you're joining us from across the different time zones and regions. Today's session is Global Perspectives and the Shape of Society, and we are honored to welcome our esteemed speaker, Dr. Debra McMahon. Dr. McMahon is the Director of Faculty Development and Professor of Spanish at Shelton Hill University. She holds a PhD in Spanish Literature from the University of California, Irvine, along with 3 master's degrees in Curriculum and Instruction, English Literature, and the Teaching of Languages. Her extensive research has led to several impactful publications, including her most recent book, A Laboratory of Her Own, Women and Science in Spanish Culture, published by Vanderbilt University Press in 2021. She is also the co-editor of African Immigrants in Contemporary Spanish Texts, Crossing the Strait, and the author of a monograph focused on Lara James' poetry titled Cultural Encounters in Contemporary Spain. Additionally, her work has appeared in very respected journals. A passionate traveler, Dr. McMahon has lived in, visited, and led student trips to many countries, including Argentina, Spain, Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador, Puerto Rico, Morocco, India, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, and Germany. Her lawful cultural exchange has profoundly shaped her academic and professional life. Dr. McMahon's story is also a testament to the power of lifelong learning. She didn't begin studying Spanish until after college, and now she tells her students that it's never too late to master a new language. An inspiring reminder that non-native speakers can indeed become experts in foreign languages and any stage of life. Before we begin, I'd like to remind our live audience that you can participate in today's discussion on social media using the hashtag IEW UNE 2024 and hashtag UNE tu Potencial. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions throughout the event. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Debra McMahon to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I loved hearing that list of all the places that I visited. Those are good memories. And I'm just wondering, I have tried to share the screen, and I'm not sure if someone in the background needs to share the slides that I've posted, but if you could let me know how to best go about doing that. I am sharing screen, but it is not presenting as far as I can tell.
So there are click on present button and then share, and we should be able to see your presentation.
Okay, so I have
present
share, and it says that I am sharing. Let's see here. I can stop screen. I have that choice, but I'm actually currently sharing my screen, but for some reason it is not appearing.
So try stopping it, and then we'll try.
All right. I apologize. We've had some technical glitches today, so here we go. We'll go with the screen share again. Okay, it is not sharing. It shows up for me, but it is not showing up on the screen for you, so that's very strange. How best?
If you drop it in the private chat, I can share it from and then just move forward and backward for you. Does that make sense? You have to share screen here in the StreamYard studio.
Yeah, I am sharing screen in the StreamYard studio. Oh, I so apologize. It is not wanting to share for you. So it is visible to me. It says it's sharing, and it says I can stop screen sharing, but it is, it's going to be a little bit challenging. Let's see here. How best to do this?
Okay, if it's okay with you, we can go to the background, and then we'll stop momentarily and then come back.
I apologize. I'm not sure why I won't share.
Fine, no problem. We can do that. Okay,
Oh,
Debra, I think we're
there it
ready.
is.
And all set.
There it
Ready?
is. Okay. Yes.
Okay,
So I don't need to click to any other studio. I'm in the right studio now.
that's correct.
Okay. I so apologize, Kim. I'm not sure what has gone on, but I'm so sorry about that.
Take it away.
All right. Okay, everyone. So finally, I think we have my presentation up and running. So once again, Debra Faszer-McMahon, and I'm delighted to be with you. And we're just going to dive in. I teach at the university level, and so I'm going to ask you to be students with me a little bit tonight. We're going to be talking about global perspectives and some of the challenging conversations that are happening right now globally. And so I'm wondering if you would take this, take a look at this list of, these are actually courses. So we're going to sort of pretend that you are students. And if you had the opportunity to sign up for a global course on global perspectives for perhaps next spring, what course from this list might you be interested in? Or would there be another particular part of the world or region that you would be interested in studying? So I'm just going to ask you to take a minute and post in the chat. Maybe you're interested in medicine, maybe that's your field and you would love to take plagues and pandemics, or global medicine. I teach quite a bit in the global medicine field through medical Spanish at my university. Or perhaps you're more invested in culture and music, so world music might be more to your liking. Perhaps you're interested in dance and culture and you'd like to travel to Buenos Aires. This is just a list of some courses that are offered on my campus this next semester. And I'm just curious what you all might be interested in. So it looks like we have modern China as a possibility. And hopefully there are a few others that people are interested in taking. I wanted you to think about global perspectives and the possibility of what you might like to explore, because part of my goal is just opening up worlds and promoting global learning. And I know that the focus of this conference has been on exchange and cross-cultural understanding. And so tonight I want to talk just a little bit about that. And in order to have that conversation, I'm going to do a couple of different things. We're going to start with an image analysis, thinking about some global economic and social disparities. I'm also going to ask you to think about some theories of migration. So when we think about economic disparities, I think migration has to come into that conversation. And then I'm going to ask you to participate in a simulation about the shape of society. And then we'll just have a few questions and some discussions. So I'm excited to see what you might be interested in exploring. So we're going to take a minute now, and I'm just going to put an image on the screen. And I'd like you just to post in the chat one or two things that you notice in this image. I'm not going to tell you where it's from quite yet, but I just want you to take a moment, analyze the image, and post in the chat just one thing that you notice here. It might be something about the architecture. It might have to do with the colors. It might have to do with some of the divisions that you notice. So I'll just give you a second to analyze this image. You might also guess where you think this picture comes from, what global locale we might be pointing to, but what do you notice in this image? I often like to use images with my students to kind of start off our discussion. And so I'm interested to see what you note. Okay, so it looks like cultural divisions. Certainly you can see that here. Anyone else with something that you're noticing? As you're thinking about what you might have to say, I wanted to let you know that this image actually comes from Rio de Janeiro. And it is an image on one side of a favela and on the other side of some high-rise apartment buildings with their own private pools and the tennis court and the giant swimming pool. And certainly, I think many of the things that have been mentioned here are pretty apparent. So we can see some social segregation, some economic differences pretty clearly. In fact, there's just that really stark line right down the middle, marking that. And so I wanted to start off our conversation tonight by thinking a little bit, as we're talking about global perspectives, about precisely some of those social and economic barriers that are constructed in our societies and how that impacts us. So the UN has done a lot of studies of global wealth distribution. And one of the things they've noted is that the top 1% globally control almost 50% of the total wealth. So a really tiny percentage who control most of our resources. And then if you look at the bottom 50%, actually more than 50%, they're actually only having access to just a little over 1% of global resources. And so I think those wealth divides are absolutely impacting all of us globally. And I think you can think within, your own particular location and community where you see those wealth divides as well. So we can see it on a global scale. I think we can also see it quite locally. I think when we think about that issue of wealth distribution, it's important to acknowledge the places that we come from. So thinking about, where you were born. I happen to be born in South Dakota in the United States, a very rural region in the north, almost in Canada. And that has definitely impacted a lot of the opportunities that I've had in my life. I was born into a middle-class family. My parents were both teachers. But I also have a story to share about that. When I was 10 years old, my dad got a job, and it involved working in India. And so we traveled to India that year and lived overseas for an entire year. And I have this very clear memory, both of experiencing India and the amazing, rich, diverse cultures there, but also seeing different levels of poverty and of economic disparity that I had not even realized existed, that I hadn't seen, in my home neighborhood, and that were really shocking. So just one example of that was just when I arrived at the airport the very first day in Mumbai, 3 a.m. I went to the bathroom and I realized that there were some people who were sleeping on the floor of the bathroom. And I was only 10 years old, but it was life-changing for me that I didn't realize that there were people who were unhoused and who might need to find shelter, in a public restroom. And I think the same thing when I came back to the States after India, I realized, again, some of the economic disparities that I hadn't seen in my own culture of origin before I left. So I want you to think about, just imagine a little bit waking up tomorrow to a completely different economic reality, how that might affect you or impact you. This happened actually very recently in North Carolina, close to where I live, where we had, horrible flooding from hurricanes, and people woke up from one day to the next without housing, without power, without any of the basics. And that will be an ongoing devastation for them that has really impacted their economic reality. And so, as one of you mentioned, climate change is certainly driving some of these changes. I think art is one way that we can build empathy for economic disparities that maybe might not be affecting us now, but that affect people in many parts of the world. And so I'm going to share a poem with you. This is a poem called Kindness. It's by Naomi Shihab Nye. And I'm actually going to read the poem. I think it's really important to recite poetry and to engage with art in that way. And as I read, I'd just like you to pick maybe one word or one line or one phrase that you find powerful, and you can just put that word or phrase in the chat. So this is called kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Hopefully there was one word or one phrase in there that spoke to you. If there was, you can post that in the chat. Naomi Shihab Nye is an Arab American poet, and but she writes a lot about human rights and particularly about migration. And I think poetry is a really important window for us, even if we ourselves have perhaps not experienced the pain that this poem attests. Using our imagination and hearing other people's stories and voices, I think, can give us a sense of empathy and an ability and willingness to listen and to think about our impact on the world and on others. Naomi Shihab Nye also writes quite a bit about migration. And when we talk about economic disparities, I think it's important to involve that in the conversation. And certainly in my country right now, we've just had an election where migration has been a major topic of focus. And there's also been a lot of really, I think, hurtful vitriol about migrants. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight was how I talk through some of these issues with my students and the kinds of global perspectives that I think are important when we think about an issue like migration. So the UN International Organization for Migration recently released a report talking about some of the drivers for migration. So certainly economic opportunity is still a really important driver, like 70%, so well more than half. You have another 20% that comes from conflict or persecution, from climate change, and then, family reunifications and education, a little bit less than 10%. But there's a wide range of drivers of migration. And I think something that this data doesn't point out is kind of the mutuality between sending and receiving regions or countries. And Saskia Sassen writes about this quite a bit. She's a professor at Columbia University, and she notes, and this is a quote, that immigration is not simply the outcome of individuals in search of better opportunities. It is produced by specific conditions and patterns in both sending and receiving countries. And I think the emphasis there on patterns and specific conditions in both the sending and receiving countries in some ways challenges or questions the word opportunity here when we think about economic opportunity and the drivers of migration. I think that's true, and it's also true on both sides, and it also is more complex than that and has to do with patterns. So we're going to look just a little bit at some patterns, and again, I'm going to ask you to step into that student mode with me. And I'm going to talk about kind of 4 theories of migration. These are the 4. And as we're kind of looking at these 4, I want you to first maybe pick one of these. You may have heard of one of them before. You've maybe never heard of any of these theories, and that's okay. But I'd like you to just pick one of them, and I'd like you to think about what might be involved in that theory. Whether you think, that might be focused more on social structures or family dynamics or the direct exchange of goods or market forces or, anything that you think. Maybe it's just something from the title that triggers. And if you want to post in the chat what you think, neoclassical economics might refer to. Really, this is just getting some ideas in your brain before I give you some information about these theories of migration. These are 4 very important theories that certainly impact migration to the US as a receiving country and to many other countries throughout the world. And when I work with my students on thinking about migration, I think it's really important that they understand the complexities based on these theories. So hopefully you've thought through a couple of ideas you might have about dual labor market or world system theory. And I'm going to show you some definitions now and then kind of talk through in the context of my location in the US why I think it's important to look at all 4 of these theories. And you can kind of take a look and see if any of the ideas you came up with connect with any of these theories. But neoclassical economics really thinks about migration based on market forces. So it's really about where there is work and where there is opportunity for income. That's where migrants will travel. And the idea that migrants have lots of information and they're making choices based on accurate and full information. So in some ways that's, a little bit of a downside of that theory, that perhaps that's not always the case, that people have good information, but certainly the importance of market forces. And we can certainly see that in American culture, where when the economy is doing well, migration tends to increase, and when we're struggling, the market forces impact that as well, as do political choices and decisions. The new economics of migration, I think, is really fascinating because it emphasizes not just the economic or market systems, but family systems. And one of the things that happens there is families are very wise, and they know that they kind of have to diversify their portfolio of income in the family. And so you may have a family member who you think, okay, let's have this child work in government. That's going to be a good source of income. And you may have another family member who you want to encourage to work in the private sector. And then you may have another family member that it would be great if they could go abroad and earn some income abroad. And so migration is kind of part of a family dynamic where you're figuring out best how to survive economically within your family unit. And also then if you have family already in an international context, that is going to make it easier for other connections or social ties or family members to migrate. So we can think about family systems as part of that new economics. It's not just the market force, it's the family system. Dual labor market theory, I think, is perhaps the most important in the American context, and that's really the idea that there are certain spaces or sectors that are wanting cheap labor. And in fact, the economy of those locations would really struggle if it weren't for cheap imported and often undocumented labor. And I think we see that very clearly in the American context. Even right now, our unemployment rate is extremely low, historically low. Many of the businesses in the town and the region where I live are advertising for help and are in desperate need of employees. And so that's another driver, wanting to offer low pay and wanting to have many employees, and there not being enough people in the workforce available. And then the last theory, again, one that I think certainly really impacts the region that I come from, is world system theory. And this is probably the least talked about in the American context, but I think is critically important. So it's really just recognizing how interventions of developing countries or of developed countries in other parts of the world have increased economic inequality and other types of inequalities over time, and that can lead to instability, economic decline, and create incentives for migration. So we certainly see that in the history of American culture, and that is certainly a driver within the Latin American context, as well as many other parts of the world. So the UN, I think, has offered some really important solutions, and some of those relate to their sustainable development goals. Goal number 10 is focused on reducing inequality, and I would encourage you to look into some of the solutions that they're looking for. The more that we can reduce inequality in certain regions of the world, I think the less instability there will be and the less tensions and challenges we will have around migration. But I really agree with Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who says the world would be a better place with more migration, not less. We, for a long time, have had kind of the free movement of goods, but we haven't allowed very much movement of people. And so when the goods are all moving very freely, but people are not, that leads to great inequality. And also, I think it just limits the cultural richness that we could experience if we were more open. Regardless of whether you agree with Amartya Sen in that quote about the world being a better place, the reality is just simply that migration is growing rapidly, continuing to grow. In the 1990s, we had about 150 million global migrants. And as of last year, so again, this is UN data, we're almost double, almost 300 million migrants. And so regardless of whether you think that's a good thing or not, that just is the trend. And I think, as some of you had mentioned in the chat, particularly when you think about climate change and the growing economic disparities, that trend is going to continue to grow. And so one of the things that I think is very important is for us to think about, when migration is at these levels, what kinds of attitudes and perspectives help us to connect and to make kind of this new interaction positive and productive, and what are some of the attitudes that really stymie that, and not just around migration, but around a range of issues. So I'm going to ask you to participate in a little simulation. It's called the Parable of the Polygons. And I'm actually just going to post in a chat a link that you can use in order to participate in this simulation yourself. You also can kind of watch the simulation on my screen if you happen to be on a cell phone or on something that would make it hard to participate. But it looks like that link might not be a hyperlink. Let me see if I can make that a hyperlink. But the issue is that it's just a lot more fun if you can play this post yourself, rather than just simply following along with mine. I'll try this one more time to see if I can make this a hyperlink. Oh, it doesn't look like it's a hyperlink. So you may have to copy and paste into your web browser to get this playable post to work for you. So this is called Parable of the Polygons, and it's a playable post about the shape of society. You can actually pick your language if you would prefer to do it in Spanish or German or Arabic or Hebrew, or wherever you're at, if that works best for you. And I'll kind of walk you through just the first section, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to do this playable post on your own. So this is a story about how sometimes harmless choices can make for a really divided and harmful world. And so we've got some shapes, we've got squares and triangles, and 50-50, but all of them are just a little bit shapeist, but only just a little bit. So every polygon would actually prefer to have a little bit of diversity in their mix. And you can only move them if they're unhappy. So this one has a sad face, so I can move him over to the other side. If they're happy or if they're just kind of meh, you can't really move them. That's sort of when they're okay where they are. But if they're unhappy, you can move them. And they've just got one simple rule. They want to move if less than a third of their neighbors are like them. That's kind of their rule. And so the playable post just asks you to go through and see if society were like this, if we wanted to move, if less than a third of our neighbors were like me, what would that look like? So I'm going to go ahead and just give you, if you were able to click that link, just to give you about 5 minutes to go through and play the post. I'll also be posting it or playing it here on the live stream. So if you're on a cell phone or some other way where you can't play it yourself, you can kind of follow along and read and see me play. But for the rest of you, I'll give you about 5 minutes. And if someone could just let me know if that playable link is well. Okay. And somehow I feel like I just lost sound. Can you still hear me? I hope you can. Okay, so if you are struggling, I saw someone posted, I don't know where to put them so everyone is happy. You really just want to drag and drop them. And generally speaking, they are going to want to be around, 2/3 of shapes that look like them. So you can see as I'm moving unhappy shapes, if I move them closer to shapes that are similar to them, they get a little bit happier. So whoever posted that they were struggling how to know how to move them, that's kind of how you know. Hopefully that helps. bias, and the past really impacts what's happening in the present. And that if we all demonstrate a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of openness, and a desire for diversity, that can really have a positive impact on the future. So a couple of questions that I wanted to throw out for you. Just perhaps a one-word reaction to the simulation in the chat, something that you found interesting about it, or that surprised you, any insights that you might have had. And then also where you might see some economic or social divides within your own context. So I can actually speak to my own context just thinking about the political divide and thinking about the shape of society. It would probably be really good for me if I made more of an effort to reach out across that political divide within my own culture. So not just socioeconomic, or not just racial, or not just class, or not just gender, but maybe what are some other divides that you see within your own culture. And I see a couple of people have posted kind of one-word reactions to the simulation. It was tricky. It was a struggle. Yeah, some thoughtful insights. And kind of the last thing I wanted to leave you with is just that I think small efforts to connect across divides can actually lead to really large social good. And you can think about whether you agree or disagree with that, but I choose to be hopeful. And it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful to UNE and for this conference and this opportunity. I love connecting with colleagues from other parts of the world and sharing a bit from my experience and learning a bit from yours. And so just to finish, a few takeaways. I wanted to give you an opportunity to analyze some global divides, to think about some theories of migration, to participate in a digital simulation, and then to discuss some global perspectives and think about the benefits of intercultural exchange. So thank you so much for participating. And I think we just have a couple of minutes left. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McMahon, for your reflections on global perspectives and the way they shape society, which are both inspiring and essential in today's interconnected world. Now, we would like to open the floor to questions from our audience. If you're joining us via StreamYard, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, feel free to submit your questions in the chat, and we will try to address as many as possible. While we wait for the questions to come in, I would like to remind everyone that you can continue to engage with us on social media by using the hashtags IEW UNE 2024 and hashtag UNE tu Potencial. We love seeing the conversation unfold. So let's dive into the Q&A session. Dr. McMahon, are you ready to take some questions?
I am. Thank you so much, Axel. Oh, I see a question from Kim. Yes, why does it seem we resist diversity so much? Ooh, that is a great question, and I think it also, I think it does speak to the core of kind of how, in some ways, how our brains operate just as the human animals that we are. So I think even in research studies of infants and toddlers, we already see a resistance to difference. In some ways, because I think perhaps we find it threatening or uncomfortable, or we just don't know quite what to do with it. And so I think part of that resistance is, just out of a really kind of innate fear in some ways that we have. And I think part of educational opportunities like this is, and so many other things, is just learning that we actually don't have as much to fear as we might think from diversity and from difference. So, And let me see, Mariela has a question. What personally motivated you to focus on global perspectives? You know, I think I grew up in a very rural environment that was not particularly diverse. So it's actually really surprising that I have taken this focus with my career. But I do think it comes back to that experience I had when I was 10, living overseas for a year. It really is this very visceral, like before and after experience for me, where I learned so much about myself and my own culture by being outside of it for a time. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And it's one of the gifts that I most love being able to share with my students. I travel with them really frequently, and love to see how traveling, and not just traveling, but even interactions like this via Zoom, help them to learn more about themselves and their own culture by seeing how it might be similar to and different from other perspectives. All right, let's see, Luisa, you think diversity at its finest is really a game changer in how we work as society? I really do. I think that diversity allows us to be far more creative and really more deeply fulfilled. I think we need difference in order to meet our deepest and fullest potential. And for a variety of reasons, I think we avoid it, but I think we desperately need it. So, Stephanie, how can we open our minds and not only accept but embrace and understand differences? Oof. So I do think, that it has to be more than just head knowledge. I think it has to be things that touch our heart. And for that reason, I believe it has to touch our heart. And I think art, music, stories, film, I think all are avenues for that. But I also think it has to be personal relationships and connections. I think it can't just be theoretical. You know, we looked at some great theories of migration and, statistics about economic disparities. But I think it really does have to be interpersonal and deeply connected relationally. And that's the only way to really change hearts and minds.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughtful responses, Dr. McMahon. As we come to the end of today's session, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to you for joining us and sharing your expertise. Thank you as well to all of you for participating, whether through your questions, comments, or simply by being a part of this global conversation. A special thanks to our technical team for ensuring everything runs smoothly across the multiple platforms. And now, everyone here for making International Education Week UNE 2024 a success. Before we conclude for the day, don't forget to stay connected via social media and keep the conversation going with the hashtags IEW UNE 2024 and hashtag UNE tu Potencial. On behalf of the entire organizing team, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Farewell, and keep exploring the world through education.